It started like any other quiet Thursday evening. The kind where the sun melts into the horizon and the breeze carries the scent of roses from the front yard. Where my wife Angela knelt with her straw hat, shielding her face from the fading light. As she watered the flowers she had so lovingly planted around the base of our old oak tree. The same tree that stood witness to our kids growing up. Birthdays celebrated. And quiet porch talks we'd shared since I retired from the Navy SEALs 5 years ago after 20 long years of service. Years marked by dust, blood, salt water, and silence when words failed to express the intensity of what we lived through. So coming home to this peaceful neighborhood in the hills of Northern California had felt like a well-earned reward. A sanctuary, a place to finally let my guard down, or so I thought. Until the day our homeowners association decided they had more authority over our home than we did. And it all began with a bronze eagle statuette, a simple, respectful, 12-inch tall eagle perched atop a granite base, wings partially spread, talons gripping the American flag. A symbol that honored not just my time in uniform, but the memory of my best friend and teammate, Marcus, who never came home from our last tour in Afghanistan, and whose family visits every year to place flowers beneath that statue, which I had carefully positioned in the corner of our front yard among the marigolds and lavender Angela adored, thinking it would never draw ire in a nation built on freedom. But the HOA saw it differently, sending their first letter 2 months ago, stating the ornament was unauthorized lawn decor in violation of community uniformity standards. A line so absurd I nearly laughed, thinking it must be a clerical error, and I politely drafted a letter back explaining its significance, attaching a copy of the HOA's own guidelines which said seasonal or symbolic decorations must be reasonable and not obstructive. None of which applied to our eagle, but the board didn't care. And 2 weeks later, we received a formal warning. Then a $100 fine, which I paid just to avoid hassle, thinking it would stop there. But it didn't. Instead, it escalated with another letter, more threats, and finally a notice pinned to our front door, demanding removal of the statue within 7 days or risk further fines and possible legal action, which Angela cried over the night she found it because she knew how much that small monument meant to me. And still I said, let's keep it civil. Because I didn't want to be the XL who stirred up trouble, not in a neighborhood where kids rode scooters down sidewalks and retirees waved from porches. But what I didn't realize then was that this HOA wasn't just strict, it was aggressive, self-important, and led by a man named Raymond Kessler, a retired insurance broker who had appointed himself as a sort of suburban dictator, micromanaging everything from mailbox paint to lawn height, and surrounding himself with 2 compliance officers, hired security who patrolled the neighborhood on foot like they were guarding a federal facility instead of a cul-de-sac. And still I let it slide until the evening that changed everything, when Angela, with her soft voice and peaceful demeanor, stepped outside to water her plants, humming to herself like always, wearing her gardening gloves and a pink apron with embroidered daisies, completely unaware that at that very moment 3 HOA enforcers were already rounding the corner with clipboards and bad intentions. Raymond, his new chief compliance officer Dale, a bulky man with mirrored sunglasses and an overinflated sense of authority, and a third man I didn't recognize, a younger, smug-looking guy snapping photos of every house they passed like some amateur investigator. And when they reached our lawn, they didn't knock, didn't greet, didn't even wait for Angela to acknowledge them. They just walked right up to the edge of the flower bed and started pointing, mumbling between themselves before Raymond barked, "That statue is still there." That's a direct violation, to which Angela, bless her heart, looked up and said, "We've explained this before. It's a memorial." Her voice kind but firm, and Raymond just scowled, snapping, "We don't make exceptions." Warned, and before she could respond, Dale stepped closer, too close, and jabbed a finger toward the base of the statue, knocking over one of her potted rose plants in the process, shattering the ceramic pot she'd painted herself just last spring. And when Angela gasped and instinctively moved to pick it up, Dalius, a grown man nearly twice her size, placed a hand on her shoulder and shoved her back. Not hard enough to send her flying, but enough to make her stumble and cry out as her arm twisted awkwardly and her watering can spilled across the grass. And that's when I saw it, every second of it, from our front window where I had just finished folding laundry. And my hands froze. The breath left my lungs and a kind of stillness overtook me, the same kind that used to settle over me just before a mission, when the adrenaline hadn't kicked in yet, but the world narrowed to a pinpoint of focus, and I moved quietly, efficiently through the front door and onto the porch, my voice low and level as I said, "Take your hands off my wife," causing all three men to turn toward me. Surprised, but not yet afraid. Raymond opening his mouth to object, but I cut him off with a calm, "Step away from her now," and Dale did step back, maybe sensing something, maybe not, as the younger man raised his phone and said, "We're documenting this," to which I replied, "So am I," holding up my own phone and tapping to play the live feed from our home security camera, which had caught every second of the incident in high definition. Angela's stumble, Dale's shove, their confrontational approach, and as the footage played, the smiles slipped from their faces. Raymond reaching forwards but finding none. Dale suddenly less confident, and the younger man lowering his phone, eyes darting between us as I stepped closer, not threatening, not yelling, just letting the weight of my presence settle in like a storm cloud before thunder. And I said, "You assaulted my wife over a statue, a memorial to a fallen soldier. You're going to regret that." And then I turned to Angela, helped her up, checked her arm, which was red and bruising at the shoulder, and kissed her forehead before telling her gently to go inside and sit down because I needed to handle this now alone. And she knew me well enough not to argue, so she walked back to the porch, tears in her eyes but her chin held high, and I turned back to the trio and said, "Leave before the police get here," and they hesitated, still clinging to whatever imagined authority they thought they had, until I added, "You've crossed a line. This is assault, caught on camera. You're going to face consequences, legal, civil, and personal. I'll make sure of it." And finally, they turned and walked briskly down the sidewalk, mumbling amongst themselves, looking over their shoulders like they were being watched, which they were by half the neighborhood, because in the short time this happened, neighbors had begun to appear on porches, word spreading fast as it does in places like ours. And I stood there in silence as the sun dipped low, my heart pounding not with fear but with the cold, calculated fire of someone who has trained his entire life to deal with aggression decisively. Because while I may have retired from the battlefield, that didn't mean I had forgotten how to fight. And now this HOA had declared war on the wrong man, and they were about to learn that protecting my family wasn't just instinct, was my mission. The silence after they left wasn't peace, it was pressure, the kind of heavy, simmering quiet that comes just before a storm breaks wide open. And as Angela sat inside holding an ice pack to her shoulder, eyes still glassy from the shock, I sat beside her, heart pounding slow and deliberate, my mind already moving like it had on every mission I ever ran, tracking targets, calculating timing, assessing terrain. Except this wasn't Fallujah or Kandahar. This was my home. And now I had to defend it not from enemies with rifles, but from smug suburban tyrants with clipboards and self-appointed power. So I kissed her forehead, told her gently that I'd take care of it, then rose and stepped into my office, where years of discipline still kept everything arranged perfectly: folders, service medals, even the folded flag for my final day in uniform on the shelf, and I powered on my computer, pulled up the security footage from the camera mounted on the front eaves of our home, and watched every frame again, making sure nothing was missed. Dale's aggressive shove, Raymond's orders, the third guy filming as if he were above the law, and then I downloaded the video, saved 3 backup copies, emailed one to my personal cloud, another to a trusted friend who happened to be a lawyer, and the last one I transferred to a flash drive which I pocketed immediately. Then I called the sheriff's department, calmly explaining that 3 individuals, identifying themselves as HOA enforcement, had entered my property without permission, verbally harassed my wife, and one had physically assaulted her, and I had video proof, high quality, time-stamped, clear as day, and to my relief, the officer on the other end didn't try to downplay it. Instead, he said, "We'll send a unit right away." And less than 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulled into our driveway, lights off, and 2 deputies stepped out. One older with a mustache, the other young and stiff-backed like I once was, and they approached with professional courtesy, listened to Angela's account, watched the video, took notes, and when they asked if I knew the names of the men involved, I gave them everything. I had full names, photos from HOA newsletters, license plate numbers I had recorded, and the fact that Dale had laid hands on my wife in front of a security camera, which made the case for assault incredibly strong. So they nodded, assured me a report would be filed, and said they'd be reaching out to the HOA board directly. And then came the part I had waited for my own operation, because I wasn't going to let this end in just a slap on the wrist or a phone call from the sheriff's office. Not after Angela's bruised shoulder and the way those men had strutted onto my lawn like they were gods of this little kingdom. So the next morning, after making sure Angela was resting and the swelling had gone down, I dressed in a crisp polo shirt, tucked in tight, and drove to the HOA office located just a mile down the road, a beige brick building that tried too hard to look official, and I walked through the glass doors carrying a manila envelope with all the printed evidence inside. And as I approached the receptionist, a young woman in her 20s, barely looking up from her phone, I calmly requested to speak with Raymond Kessler, stating I had a matter of legal urgency to discuss him. After a moment of hesitation, she called back, voice flat, and said, "Mr. Kessler will be with you shortly," which was fine by me, because I was already scanning the layout, noting exits, wall angles, security cameras, and every minor detail, as I always did, until Raymond waddled out from a side hallway wearing a blazer that was too tight across his gut, his expression smug until he recognized me on. Then it tightened just slightly. A flicker of discomfort he tried to mask as he extended his hand and said, "Mr. Jennings, this isn't the place," but I didn't shake it, didn't smile, just said, "It's the perfect place," and handed him the envelope, telling him inside was footage, sworn statements, police reports, and copies of the HOA's own bylaws, proving they had overstepped their authority and committed multiple violations of state and federal law, including trespassing, harassment, and battery, and that I had spoken with legal counsel and was prepared to press full charges unless a formal public apology was issued. All fines removed, and Dale immediately terminated from any position connected with the HOA, to which Raymond tried to interrupt, stammering something about misunderstandings and protocols. But I shut that down fast by saying, "You're not in charge anymore. This is bigger than you." And I could see the sweat starting to gather on his brow as I turned and walked out, not bothering to wait for a reply, because I had other things to handle, like contacting the local news outlet who had once interviewed me for Veterans Day. And when I called the editor and told her what had happened, she didn't even hesitate, saying, "This is exactly the kind of story people need to hear." And 2 days later, a crew showed up at our house, interviewing Angela with her arm in a sling, capturing images of the eagle statue, and airing the story that evening under the headline, "Retired Navy SEAL's Wife Assaulted by HOA Over Memorial Statue." And it went viral. Fast neighbors began coming over in support, some with casseroles, some with stories of their own about how Raymond and his enforcers had bullied them too, issuing fines for ridiculous things like the color of patio chairs or leaving garbage bins out 5 minutes too long. And it became clear that this wasn't just about us, it was about years of unchecked power abused by a small group of people who thought their HOA title gave them dominion over our lives. And within a week, a petition was circulating to hold an emergency HOA election. The minimum signatures reached in under 48 hours. And a town hall was scheduled at the community center, which was packed beyond capacity when the night arrived, and I stood near the back, letting the community speak. First, an elderly widow who had been fined for growing tomatoes in her side yard. A young couple threatened over having a porch swing, not an architectural alignment. And then, finally, Angela took the microphone, her voice still soft but powerful as she told the room what happened. How she'd been shoved and humiliated by men who had no right. How her husband, the man, standing quietly at the back, had defended her not with fists, but with truth, law, and respect. And when the room stood in applause, I felt something shift. Not pride, not vengeance, but justice. And by the end of the meeting, the vote was unanimous. Raymond and his team were removed. A new interim board was appointed, and I was asked to help rewrite the community guidelines, which I accepted, but not for power, not for control, but to make sure this never happened again. And within a month, all previous fines were rescinded. A clause was added to protect memorial displays of military or cultural significance. And Dale, facing criminal charge, quietly left town, never to be seen again. While our neighborhood slowly returned to what it once was, a peaceful place, where kids rode bikes and neighbors waved without fear, and the statue of the eagle, it now sat on a raised pedestal near the community garden, with a plaque beneath it that read, "To those who serve, and to those who stand beside them, we honor you." And every time I walk past it, hand in Angela's, I remember not just the battles I fought overseas, but the one we fought here, and won not with violence, but with resolve, integrity, and the unshakable bond of a community that finally stood together against tyranny. No matter how small the battlefield,